So after a trilogy of Super Nintendo entries, Mega Man X finally makes the jump to 32-bit platforms with Mega Man X3 for PlayStation and Saturn exclusively for the Japanese market, while the rest of the world got a Windows port. The version I'm playing is none of these, as this particular incarnation of X3 would grace the Mega Man X collection for PlayStation 2 and GameCube, thus that's what I'm using. But for the sake of simplicity, we'll just call it X3 for PlayStation because that's all it is, really. The PlayStation version of Mega Man 3 is the equivalent of taking a popular Sega Genesis video game, bringing it over to the Sega CD, and the only updates made to justify the jump is some thrown together full motion video sequences and some remixed music tracks, with the rest of the game being relatively unchanged from the cartridge version, aside from the additional loading times. And that's Mega Man X3 in a nutshell. You have some mediocre quality video clips, some remixed CD quality tunes, and some redone sound effects, some extra load times, and a generous lack of slowdown, so there's one positive aspect in this jump. In that regard, you begin with a grainy opening video before starting the opening intro stage. Once that's clear, it's off to face off against the 8 Mavericks of the day, eventually having to tackle a couple extra bosses along the way, before unlocking the final levels where you'll face off against Dr. Doppler and his evil Master Sigma. Why is this even a spoiler? As with previous Mega Man X games, you can stray off the beaten path to find upgrades such as heart containers, sub-tanks, armor upgrades that give you extra abilities, and even multiple flavors of ride armor that you'll probably never use save for certain situations that require it, usually breaking a wall to get some heart container or sub-tank stashed away. The other feature of X3 is the chip enhancements. Pink capsules that will expand X's abilities even further depending on the chip, whether it be a double air dash, to increase defenses, or something else, but only one chip can be equipped at a time. Yippee. Gold armor's right there, pal. Have fun. Save for the audio and some minor graphical upgrades, this is the same game you've played on the Super NES, now with additional load times. And I want to say there's no slowdown or flicker compared to the 16-bit version, but I don't recall X3 being prone to slowdown all that often, if at all. Regardless, everything else, the gameplay, the controls, the weapons, the bosses, the level design, the overall difficulty, all the positives, the high points, or the negatives, the low points, is pretty much the same as it appeared the first time around, and since I've already looked at X3 in the previous video and bore my soul on there pretty much, I won't repeat what's been said there because what's the point? Like I said, this is basically the equivalent of taking a Sega Mega Drive game, slapping it onto a Sega CD disc, and adding some multimedia CD quality material on there without doing much of anything else. The gameplay remains the same, controls are still responsive and functional, the levels, enemies, bosses, and whatnot, nothing's changed in that regard. So if you didn't care for X3 when it was on the Super Nintendo, putting it on a CD isn't going to change your mind. You still have enemies full of projectiles. You have levels full of enemies with projectiles, that's what I meant to say. Zero is still pretty much a backup player who bites the dust permanently when killed. There isn't anything new or additional that isn't exclusive to this edition of the game. It's pretty much the same old stuff, and for some people, that's not a bad thing. But for others... Graphically speaking, Mega Man X3 looks about the same as it did on the Super Nintendo, which is fun I suppose because X3 had some good graphics on Super Nintendo, and they made the transition to the PlayStation without so much as a hitch. The lack of slowdown or sprite flicker are the only immediately noticeable changes, and it's not much since X3 was already fairly optimized from the get-go. So I guess all that's left to talk about are the video clips, which I've said are mediocre quality videos, typical anime video quality for the time I think, but the actual animation is well done. There's no talking, which is a huge plus. The intro video is a montage of past X triumphs and teases old armors that you kinda wish they'd sneak into the game as a bonus for this version, give it some replay value worth a damn. The boss intros showcase the bosses a little more. What? Though the pre-intro stage video has a really grainy quality clip of in-game footage that looks really bad. Take the worst quality of YouTube video uploaded, play it in like 144p or whatever the lowest video setting is. This one clip is less than that. Now, on to the benefits of CD-ROM technology, which featured all new sound effects and remixed music tracks for all the stages. The sound effects are not much to comment on, there's slightly more enhanced sounds from the 16-bit versions, and at the very least, none of the characters talk because that's a positive considering what's to come. The music front, on the other hand, I realize this is going to be a largely subjective thing, so I'll just lay it out. The remix tunes are not very good. largely due to the fact that they replaced the hard, grinding, heavy rock-infused flavor of the original Super NES chiptunes and turned them into some lame, soft pop-sounding lounge music. Hell, a couple of songs actually got a bit of a change in their compositions, and they sound a bit better on the Game Boy Color, which is not high praise, nor should it be. I'm sure the remixes have their share of fans, but honestly, the Jurassic Park elevator music that I used for the last video turned out better than these remixes did. Yeah, sorry, not a fan. Ultimately, Mega Man X3 comes across as something of a half-hearted port from the 16-bit Super Nintendo to the 32-bit CD-based systems, where the gameplay remains the same for the most part, and the only real changes are cosmetic. Sure, on the surface, it's still as good of a game as it was in the original version, and the lack of slowdowns certainly helps in that regard. But it is not a game that greatly benefits from the jump to higher formats, and if you played X3 on SNES but not this, there's really no point unless you really liked X3 and want to dig into the new tracks and the video bits. The easiest way to play this version would be on the Mega Man X collection on PS2 and GameCube, which is what I used, and it works, but whatever is on the current Legacy collection is more than enough to sate your fix for Mega Man X3, even if it doesn't have the extra bits, so that's it. Good night.